Dark Souls 1 is an absolutely classic game developed by a curated team of the most sane individuals in all of Japan. The bosses of this psychopathic offspring of a series are indeed among its most identifiable staples, and work under the total confidence that a new player with enough resolve would be willing to chisel down a brick wall with nothing but their knuckles over a few dozen lives. And they're exactly right, with the once insurmountable odds being all the more rewarding once truly overcome. Most of the background gameplay will be from a playthrough I did recently for the sake of collecting footage, so I purposefully take my time or deal suboptimal damage to draw out the fights. Other footage will come from an SL1 run I did, but never used for anything else. This video, like my other rankings, will be tackling the bosses in a vague order of progression rather than from worst to best. I'll just supply my thoughts on them as they come. That's my last stipulation to mention, so I guess now we'll jump into it from the top. Wait, Return to Lordran ended a month ago? Jump into it from the top, I say, just like the boss itself. This bowling pin-shaped monstrosity descends from the roof of the asylum without shattering the floor miraculously. I guess the chosen undead is just extremely dense by the time of the return trip. Dense is, after all, a word my friends use to describe me often. Anyway, when he first appears, you're not actually intended to fight him, but instead run through a door on the left that leads to a more proper tutorial, blah blah, who cares. By the end of that sequence, the game perches you up on a high ledge where it's taught that you can plunge attack foes from above. Successfully performing it lops off about a third of the boss's health, which can really assist with getting through the battle for a first-time player, and is all in all an especially cinematic way to send off a tutorial. His moves are slow and heavy, which give you the forewarning necessary as a new player to dodge properly. This game does have a bad case of what I call the dust particle issue, however, wherein you dodge the actual main blow and are not knocked around at all, but still take a pinch of damage from the upturned soot on the floor because of the impact of the weapon. The Asylum Demon has a fair bit of this, but it's something I'll make an even greater point of with the next boss. The demon takes a lot of time turning and repositioning after each attack, which naturally teaches the back and forth dance of Souls combat by really exaggerating his end lag. This shows the player that the best time to attack is after their opponent misses them usually. Souls 1 and 2 do seem to have a bigger emphasis on position-based combat, which also works on a few attacks here. I don't have much else to say otherwise, but this lovable oaf is a good opening boss to the game that teaches many things either overtly or indirectly. Most players are going to get pecked in the back of the head with an arrow and then turn around and realize that they can scale a ladder here to dispose of the archers. Walking far enough along the bridge will cause the Taurus Demon to leap down from the opposing tower, and from there the player actually has a few options to approach the whole of the battle. The player can run straight ahead with blind aggression for the least optimal approach, spin on their heel and retreat to the ladder to perform a plunging attack, or hang out on the tower long enough to goad the beast into following, which makes for a way less insufferable arena than the extremely narrow bridge. Nonetheless, I went with the second option for this playthrough, just because. The Taurus Demon ranks so low because unfortunately it just isn't really all that interesting of an enemy. It has a few slam attacks, fairly telegraphed wide sweeps, and a dangerous leaping smash move. But the arena that most players are likely to end up with, this extremely narrow rampart that would make Margit the Felloman envious, absolutely sucks. And unlike the Asylum Demon, it really isn't being used directly as a teaching mechanism. Naturally, you can use the gold pine resin found earlier in the Undeadburg if you bought the Residence Key or started with the Master Key, in order to absolutely trivialize the Taurus Demon, but I chose not to this time for the reasons stated in the intro. As I had said under the previous section, and which you've probably seen a lot of in this combat footage, this boss is a huge offender of the dangerous dust particle issue. Like, wow, the fucking dirt on the floor has got hands, whatever. At the end of the day, I just think that the arena ends up more memorable than the Taurus Demon. If nothing else, it has an excellent design, and the song is one of the most hilariously dramatic and escalating tunes in the game, so there is that, I suppose. Fought on the rooftop of the Undead Parish and the sworn protectors of the first of the two Bells of Awakening, the Bell Gargoyles have all the makings of an excellent duo fight that with a simple decision prevented itself from being rendered far too overwhelming for the stage of the game it takes place on. The battle begins with only a single gargoyle breaking free from its stasis, attacking with a wide variety of swings using both its considerable halberd and elastic axe tail. It can fly into the air to either send you skyward with its tail or strike with its halberd and perform some wide sweeps, downward slams, and forward thrusts, all standard issue. Not locking on for this fight makes it a lot easier, and the same can be said of many of the larger foes in Dark Souls 1. In this game, locking on prevents sprinting and locks rolling to the 4 cardinal directions, which can feel super clunky and be downright detrimental in certain scenarios. You can very easily slide behind the gargoyle's backside to avoid most of its maneuvers through positioning, while also exposing a vital weak point. You can cut off the tail with enough blows to it, giving you a weapon, dealing a big chunk of instant damage, and preventing it from using the tail to attack for the rest of the fight. Below half health, a second pre-wounded gargoyle descends, with this one heavily favoring fire breath attacks that will force you to constantly be on the move. The worst thing that you can do is let the pair push you against an arena boundary, because then you're going to get the experience of becoming a roasted ham. Not only are you already familiar with the second Goyle because of the fight setup, but they innately try not to become too overwhelming due to the way they complement each other. The fire breath attack leaves the one using it very exposed from the other sides, and you can take advantage of that so long as their partner doesn't have anything to say about it. Once one falls, the other will not take long to follow. Like the Taurus Demon, it's very popular for players to use a gold pine resin on this fight to render their health bar a meal eaten in gigantic bites. But unless you're familiar with them enough to have it not wasted, I wouldn't recommend it. This glistening wizard shit is a rare commodity, especially in the early game, and it's not going to win you the battle if you don't already understand the backbones of it. The Moonlight Butterfly is fought at the end of an optional side path in the Darkroot Garden, but that little stretch is also the only part of the garden that you can access in the early game without either cheating or doing some downright asinine farming, so you're unlikely to miss it if you head this way regardless. The best thing I could compare the Moonlight Butterfly to is a Mario Galaxy boss. It sort of hovers around out of reach and blasts with ranged attacks from the sky, forcing the player to outlast its assaults of petulant magic arrows and homing triple blasts, until it inevitably descends and exposes itself for a short time. The window to damage it is brief, and after enough time it'll retreat back into the sky and start the whole thing all over again. Over time it gradually adds new attacks, in the form of a sweeping laser beam that's really easy to dodge, and an overhead explosion that's impossible to dodge. If you're a keen player or a returning one that ventures back to the Asylum as early as possible like I do, you can get the Crush Shield to render this battle completely harmless since all of its attacks deal magic damage. You will very easily outlast the Butterfly in a battle of attrition due to the 90% penalty all of its attacks get when you block. Even more so if you retained the extra flasks from Firelink like I did in this run. What keeps this fight so low is the lack of skill expression to lots. Unless you're a ranged build, and even then you're probably not going to do much damage because arrows suck and it's naturally magic resistant, you can't really do more damage in this fight than what the boss allows for in its set attack cycles. The Butterfly is either rendered easy to the point of barely being a boss if you overlevel, or tedious to the point of being unfun if you don't. On top of all that, it's just not very fun at its core. I give it the few points it has for actually evolving as the health bar dwindles and being, if nothing else, unlike any other boss in the game. The Capra Demon is a kind old woman that stays at home in her cramped lower burg apartment and tends to her 2 pet dogs. She uses her pair of large cleavers to prepare cuts of meat to donate to the local food pantry, and dreams of one day opening a bed and breakfast. And then your Mad Max ass smashes through her front door to commit homicide in the name of some schizo prophecy. This fight is notorious for being extremely overwhelming and claustrophobic, and can end up being the nail in the coffin for a lot of players. The dogs get in your way, fuck you up, stagger you if you don't have poise, and then the Capra Demon itself slices you into thirds like some 5th grade math class shit with a dual downward chop. If you're a returning player and you don't go run and grab the wolf ring from Darkroot Garden before doing this fight, you're insane. Though I suppose if you're a returning player, you're also just going to start with the Master Key and skip lower burg in depths anyway, so whatever. Nonetheless, the 40 poise given by the wolf ring will give you all the time you need to bolt like hell to the staircase at the left of the room, which will funnel the dogs up faster than the demon and allow you to tank their bites and then promptly dispose of them. Once it's down to just the Capra Demon, they can continue to be a bit of a threat alone, but my setup allowed me to at least stay standing after sustaining a strike, which gave me ample opportunity to heal. If you used a pine resin on the Taurus and Bell Gargoyles, that means you still have one you can blow here if you really hate this bitch, but it's usually not necessary. The cramped nature of the arena is rough, but a lot of the danger is dispelled once the dogs are disposed of. The fact the fight gets made or broken in the first 5 seconds is what puts it so low, but that issue is mitigated heavily by the wolf ring, as I said. I can't really say the fight is good despite that, since that still means relying on the player using a particular item to even become a bearable fight. It's higher than a few other bosses despite being simply awful just because the Capra alone is a good enemy, and once you get past the dogs, your only real big foe is the camera in this back alley the size of a kitchen freezer. This unfortunately named specimen resides in the belly of the depths, crawling up from the side of a big fucking cliff to nowhere once you enter the room. In all of that gaping he was apparently doing, he swallowed the key needed to open the gate to Blighttown, which is why you need to kill him. On the topic of keys, it's really funny that the key to each area and the path down toward the second bell implies that the next area is an even worse land where the foulest of the foul gets sent. It's like, oh yeah, Lower Burg is for the uncouth. And then the key to the depths is like, yeah, the depths are where they lock away all the truly crazies in the burg. And then the Blighttown key is like, even those of the depths were like, bros, we gotta seal away all these decrepit oozing losers in the shit pet. It's so funny. Anyway, back to the actual boss. The Gaping Dragon is a truly colossal and lumbering foe, whose hitboxes instill fear into anyone who enjoys not taking damage from an enemy that has already stopped moving. It's a bit of a formulaic fight, but there's something I weirdly like about it, probably just because it's different. This is without a doubt one of the largest entities you battle in the whole game, and the last place you want to be is in front of its colossal toothy maw. Its main attack involves slamming down and leaving its tiny head exposed, then charging forward until it hits a wall, where it'll remain stunned until the next Mayan calendar cycle. It can also lash out with its arms or do so with its tail. Like the gargoyles though, the tail can be cut off to get the mighty Dragon King Great Axe, which will neuter a huge aspect of what makes the fight annoying. Below half health, it also gains a horrific vomit attack that will annihilate your equipment durability, so run the fuck away and you should be fine. The fight is all in all pretty simple, but its health pool is Goliath. You'll be chipping away at this guy for a while, even if you take advantage of its head weak spot when you can. If you saved some of the early gold pine resin still, this is another fantastic time to take advantage of it, since dragons are weak to lightning, allegedly. I don't know why I like this fight enough to put it as high as I did, considering a lot of what I've said about it has been indifferent at best. Beyond the occasional strange hitboxes I mentioned earlier, it's if nothing else predictable and consistent. I feel like that for the point of the game at which she appears, Quelaag is an outlier in terms of health and defenses. The raw statistical power she has dwarfs some of the things around it in a rather notable difficulty spike. There's no real gimmick, she's just a tough bitch you're fighting from the top to the bottom, and I kind of respect that. It helps that her moveset is actually very expansive and versatile, but not in an overwhelming way. Her fighting style is distinct, using a lot of zoning and spacing tactics relative to the arsenals of big ol' slams and swipes used by the early game Demon Brigade. She leaves magma on the floor that deals absolutely colossal damage when stepped into, and hounds the player constantly with a left-right-forward flaming sword combo. The best opening is when she uses the magma breath attack, but be prepared for her to use her get the fuck away from me explosion right after. And definitely don't retreat to where she's later puddles. The arena is very large, and by the time you're pushed away from one half of it, the other side has probably had all the lava drain. My best advice is to cling to her left side and let yourself get caught in the little nook between her two frontmost legs. Her melee attacks will miss you, but again, have the foresight to run out after, because her explosion will probably just insta-kill you with counter damage. Be careful while caught on her side not to get pushed by her fat spider ass into a lava pool and immediately die though. And definitely don't lock on. You will need to be able to sprint to avoid a lot of her more dastardly attacks. An excellent fight that comes out guns blazing with a really cool and varied moveset, which I believe warrants a top 5 spot. A lot of Dark Souls 1 bosses are fairly simple affairs, but Quelaag steps above that mold slightly and does so in a unique way. He really stands out compared to the rest of the early game, which she kind of acts as a capstone too. I don't know at what level the player is expected to fight Pinwheel. I went to the catacombs a tad earlier than I usually do on this playthrough since I wanted to kill Patches for the Crescent Axe before he moved to the Tomb of the Giants. And even then, Pinwheel still fell over in less than 60 seconds. I suppose that he's supposed to make up for his fragility with the Clone Conjuration ability, something he flaunted to an unforeseen degree in this playthrough. The Fireball attack can cause some serious harm if underestimated, or if multiple clones fire them and chain stun you, but that's very unlikely. Pinwheel simply falls so low because no matter when you come here, he's hardly going to put up a fight. The combat model he posits went on to live vicariously through battles like the Crystal Sage, but I actually think Pinwheel wins points on the atmospheric front even over that fight. He's a very unique individual, it's got some telltale imagery and thematics going on, which I can't help but love, even if he is scarcely a threat. The Rite of Kindling is a good reward from him as well. He may be pretty easy, but he isn't an offensively bad battle either. I would say that he isn't a real boss, but I guess if that joke wasn't done to death already, then it wouldn't be hanging out in the catacombs. As soon as you enter this boss room, run to the left such that you're in line with the broken pillar. It will block the ranged air slash attack the golem projects from its axe at the very start of every attempt. Hopefully you also slaughtered the giant standing on the tower that's now behind you, so that he doesn't cave in your skull with a large pot of explosive powder. The golem itself is, like many bosses before him, a titanic lumbering entity with a big weapon that will do everything he can to fuck you up. Though he can be killed conventionally, a major gimmick that surrounds this battle is the instability of his ankles, which can be used to your advantage. Striking him with enough damage to the same leg will cause him to lose balance for 18 minutes, and keeping up pressure from there will completely topple him over and leave him entirely helpless for just as long. If you cause that to happen close enough to the edge of the arena, he can even plummet off of it and instantly die. That's just as likely to happen to you though if you fall victim to his grab move or his sweep attack. The grab reaches all the way behind him, so be sure to extra back away when you see him wind that one up. Ideally, you just kill him by knocking him off one of the thin bridges, because if you don't, you'll be here until the 23rd century striking at this geriatric life alert needing titan stuck on his ass that can't even defend himself. I give it the points that I do for at least having a rather entertaining gimmick, and though it's not hard to get him to topple once he's wobbling, he still puts up a fair bit of a fight prior to that. If you are forced to just kill him normally by nibbling away at the whole HP bar, you'll at least have a somewhat thrilling battle of footing and positioning atop Sen's fortress, which is why he is where he is about halfway down the list. Fitting for such a middle-of-the-road, middle-of-the-game boss. An absolute classic these two are. All you ever hear about is Ornstein Smough, and they definitely deserve the bulk of the accolades they receive. It is, after all, according to most gamers, the only duo fight to ever exist. You have two best friends in this fight, the Pillars and Smough's own size. The only way you're going to assume control of this fight is by manipulating their tendency to get caught on pillars, or to reset to a weird idle walk state to amble around them. Smough can also serve as a large, slow wall between you and Ornstein, who would otherwise be scratching at your face like a rabid wolverine. This is especially useful if you actually want to kill Smough first, like I usually do. But it can also just give you a quick breather to heal if you're otherwise unable to run to cover in time. That isn't to say that Smough is passive and will let you get away with it, but his attacks are rather easily avoided through smart positioning, and a lot of them, such as his slam, have extremely long recovery times. If he's also keeping Ornstein from ravaging your entire life at the same time, then fantastic. Ornstein and Smough fail to understand the definition of the phrase, your turn, by constantly attacking all the time, which makes for a thrilling fight that leaves you constantly gasping for air. Ornstein has a lot of attacks that can cover some downright insane distances, as well as ranged lightning projectiles that can be blocked by the pillars. Smough is a lot slower, but oftentimes requires a bit of a delayed response to his moves. His hammer charge is heinous if you don't light roll, and if he does it multiple times in a row, the stun lock can start to feel a bit bullshit. Though the groundwork is an amazing duo fight where the two partners actually complement each other well and the arena is made to facilitate them, there is still a lot of inherent bugginess to the encounter. For example, Ornstein frequently gets caught on geometry and then glitchily maneuvers around it in, at times, obnoxious ways. They weren't going to be any higher even if they didn't have that, just because my opinions of the two bosses above them in the ranking are irrefutable. So, sorry Lion Man and Hammer Guy. My suggestion for Phase 2 Ornstein is to never trust his idle state. Always attack after he does, and don't feel safe when he's liable to queue up his next attack. You need to be vigilant for his backstep thrust grab or his lightning slam. You already don't have a lot of time to react to those, and if you're in the middle of an attack windup, you're going to sustain some massive counter damage if they connect. The backstep he does on the grab can get him cornered if he decides not to use a rush move to get out of it though, which can make wailing on him a lot more free. Ornstein is otherwise simply not used to being large, and a lot of his normal attacks end up very harmless because FromSoft had the divine charity the single time to not make his entire body a hitbox when he moves. Phase 2 Smough is just Smough but with lightning and shit, you'll work it out. Sif is a pretty good fight, which I guess was an obvious thought of mine based on the position. This was the boss that on my first playthrough made me realize that playing Dark Souls 1 means being the subject of a fairy tale, and it was the music for this battle which really cemented that concept. You come here to the Memorial of Artorias in pursuit of the Covenant of the Abyss he possessed, which would allow you to walk the dark and slay the 4 kings of New Londo. But Sif, his loyal companion, watches over his grave still to ensure that none fail as he did again. I said at the start that Sif is a good fight, but I do actually have a few dissenting opinions about it. Notably that all of the attacks feel very samey. They've got a big 3-step combo, the uppercut move that has them retreat, and the very punishing double spin move. If they have some distance to close, there's also a unique running slash they can use. But that's really it, and all of it can be entirely invalidated by standing closer than the hilt of the sword. The entire area beneath Sif is entirely safe until they hop away, and even then they aren't exactly the most eager to do that, it would seem. Sif makes up for their poor maneuvering an incredulous blind spot with downright monstrous damage though. It does feel partially intentional, since of course you have to hit Sif to progress the fight, and anywhere you could reasonably be hitting them from is pretty much safe from damage. It doesn't reflect well on the attack versatility or anything, but at least I can understand the fight's premise if that's the case. Despite how weirdly bipolar the difficulty can be, Sif ranks so high for not feeling like their fight has aged too much. Certain battles like the Iron Golem and Centipede Demon and shit just feel like they're from an older and less experienced time. Whereas Sif was such a good foundation, they reused the idea of a big dog that hits you with the sword like 3 more times. It's very fitting that Gwyndolin uses the same boss music as the Moonlight Butterfly, because in principle they're pretty much the same fight, but at least you get to play a more active role in the pace of this one. Gwyndolin fools your ass with the classic Infinite Hallways pocket dimension trick, oldest in the book, and has you chase him down an impossibly long corridor whilst dodging an array of magical spells. The soul laser can pierce through the pillars along the side of the room that may be used as cover, forcing you to move out into the open. The homing balls do get stopped by the terrain though, and deal way more damage than they feel like they should. Hide behind them until he uses the soul spear, and use that time to get closer. He also can rise up on his snake feet and shoot at you with a bow, which might as well be a banner in his hand saying, "Please come and freely gain like 20 yards on me." Once you get close, you'll have a bit of an opportunity to cut his health bar before he retreats further down the hallway. Rinse and repeat. It's a fight that doesn't overstay its welcome assuming your weapon is up to snuff, but ends up being kind of easy once you understand the idea behind it. I don't have too much more to say about the battle otherwise, I think it's just fine. The set piece and cutscene set it up to be fairly special. It does the idea of a ranged magic boss that delays your opportunity to hit it better than some others, but all in all it ends up being kind of quick and simple. You technically don't even kill him at the end of this battle because he shows up again in Dark Souls 3. Well, he's only alright for a few thousand years or whatever because he gets eaten by a pile of petroleum runoff. Who doesn't? I actually did this fight before the previous entry, so if my character seems like they're a step back relative to the previous footage, that is probably true. I just wanted to put the Lord Soul bosses and their associates within the same proper stretch of the list for the most part. Pinwheel doesn't count. Gravelord Nito is found at the end of the Stygian pit of depravity that is the Tomb of the Giants, at the bottom of a mandatory fall damage hole. This is an especially punishing fact because Nito has a bit of a deranged sword pillar attack that he can use from anywhere in the arena and will bisect you in half for deigning to drink a flask right after dropping in. It also applies Toxic, and it's way harder to dodge than I remember. I was using a weapon imbued with Divine this playthrough, which made the battle a fair bit easier since his skeletal minions would remain dead permanently. The other ones in the room can be entirely avoided by just not going close to them. If you don't have a divine weapon, it can get a bit rough, but Nito is keen to release a detonation of nuclear darkness that kills his own minions pretty frequently. Save for the aforementioned sword plunge attack that he more often uses at close range, Nito has a fair few melee swings using his Gravelord sword in close range, which also all apply Toxic, of course. The thick mantle of darkness draping his body also seemingly protects his backside from attacks, though I think longer weapons have the range necessary to pierce through and hit him. I don't actually have a lot more to say on the topic of Nito despite how high I ranked him. A lot of it simply comes down to relative quality. He is, unlike most of the Lord Soul bosses, a fight. The most standard of the four when it comes to a proper 1v1 duel at that. Just having sensible combos and distinct moves that don't cause large swaths of my hair to disintegrate gives him points over at least 60% of the game. Most people consider this fight probably only okay at best, but there's something about the Four Kings that I love because it's just a really novel battle that you would never see replicated in the modern age. Oh. That you'd only see replicated once in the modern age. But hey, Dark Souls 1 doesn't have sleep, so fuck off. It's just so uncompromising in what it asks of the player, and I kind of respect that. Trust me, I fought these guys at level 10 with an unupgraded Gravelord sword just so I could make a reasonable low-level invasion character. The Kings do not fuck around. At least with the SL1 footage you're seeing, my weapons were upgraded. The Kings all function identically and come in one at a time, giving you a fair bit of a window to try and keep pace. Even if you do start to fall behind, they aren't all as equally aggressive, with one king at a time taking the role of active foe while the others rotate around and watch like middle schoolers egging on a fight. They'll sometimes shoot a projectile or rudely thrust their bafflingly shaped weapon into you, but for the most part they're passive. The Kings have a sweet spot mechanic that makes aggression the rule, as the handles of their blades do far less damage than the part that looks like a dorsal fin. Like I had said of Ornstein Phase 2 though, forever fear the radially explosion they can perform from their idle state. If you're slow on the draw to start running, guard with whatever you have in your hands and just pick a god and pry. My one knock, as with a lot of bosses in general, is the grab move. If I have ever successfully dodged it, it's been a pure fluke. I don't know what you're intended to do about it. It tracks you better than your phone does, as does the big chasing magic projectile that hounds you for the length of an election cycle. The bosses use a shared health bar to track overall progress, obviously, and this next tip works even on the Godskin duo and Elden Ring since they're both on a similar concept. You can continue hitting the Kings during their death animation to keep lopping health off of the main bar. The pitch black of the arena is striking, their designs are among the most inexplicable and yet simultaneously creative in the game's roster, and their song factors into the tension to an almost comedic degree. The restriction on needing to occupy one of your ring slots is also really interesting and some classic Dark Souls 1 shit. Most importantly to me though, they block access to my beloved, the Dark Sword. Really just that whole covenant in general. I love killing people. Everyone likes Priscilla as a character, and in that respect I think she's just okay. But as a fight, I don't really enjoy the execution. The idea of a boss that goes invisible and you need to track down by looking for their footsteps in the snow is actually really cool. But the way it's handled leaves more to be desired. Breed in Dark Souls 3 handles this idea okay by tethering the invisible state to certain attacks, though she also just becomes visible if you get close to her, which I wouldn't envision of Priscilla. If Priscilla went in and out of invisibility more of her own volition and as part of her actual patterns, I think it'd be a lot better than the one-and-done system the fight uses right now. I do suppose that's asking a bit within the limitations of Dark Souls 1, but the DLC proved fine enough they can make fights that can par with those of their modern works, so no excuses. There's no feedback that you're doing the fight right until she finally does appear, since the health bar is also obscured, and then at that point it's already over. She uses the Life Hunt Scythe, which has a dramatically more potent bleed proc than any other source in the game, and chunks off like 80% of your health bar when the attack that triggered it is factored in as well. It just doesn't really feel that great. Once she's visible and you can see the actual animation and patterns behind those attacks, they're revealed to just overall be more of the same. The Scythe is a very fun gimmicky weapon to build around and use, so I suppose the reward for going out of your way to fight her might at least be worth it to some. Her actual attacks are very limited and dodge just like any other after she's revealed, and I've already given a surplus of thoughts on that whole shebang, so end of section. I can't tell if this position in the ranking reflects better on Seath or worse on Priscilla and the Taurus Demon, because this is the boss that's earned its position most by happenstance. Though a 16th spot really isn't the worst, I can't even say that I like this battle. He and his mechanics and his dumb attacks and his atrocious tail cut are all just really annoying. But when it's being matched up against battles like Capra Demon and the entirety of the Demon Ruins, it just can't possibly end up low. Seath the Scaleless is impossibly large, and to his detriment because the bulk of that size is height instead of length. It makes the fight somewhat illegible at times, since his arms and head do the bulk of the telegraphing under normal conditions. His three primary attacks are close-range sweeps with his arms, a sweeping laser attack that leaves cursing crystals in its wake that he can do at a few distances, and his gigantic get-away-from-me crystal nova. Most of the fight boils down to running in close to him, whacking at him until he performs the explosion, and then running away. If you're going for the tail cut, it's even worse, because Seath can pivot like he's on top of a fucking axle. And even then, when you do get back there, he can either wiggle or slam his tentacles for some of the worst hitboxes this game has to offer. Nothing was more awful than going for the Knight's Honor achievement and having to actually slice away at his tail forever. Definitely the worst of the Lord Soul bosses that actually fight you like normal people. He's the only boss to implement Curse, which could be a good or bad thing depending on the kind of person you are. At least it's unique. I didn't even mention the gimmick with his health bar at all because it's so nothing. The crystal stands out like a sore thumb and is emphasized dramatically by the cutscene and environment. And once you realize he's not taking damage, the next course of action is obvious. You'll know what to do for the rest of your attempts, replays, an entire lifetime. While the crystal may give Seath immortality, the gimmick only lives once. If Pinwheel was at 22 because he didn't really put up much of a fight, Ceaseless falls at 23 for not even being a boss battle. I suppose you can fight him normally, something I did do on my first playthrough, but I wouldn't call it enjoyable. You can battle him as early as after defeating Quelaag, and if you're doing that, you're probably going to end up going for the easier way out that I'll explain in a second. Ceaseless Discharge is provoked either by taking the Islith Witch set from the tomb in his arena, or straight up striking his face. He pursues the player along the whole of his extremely long cliffside arena, which can be taken advantage of by running beyond the lower level that he's standing on, forcing him to make a leap of faith over to grab you. From there, his hand is exposed and you can send him plummeting to his demise with a few strikes to his gnarly boil-covered fist. The most dangerous thing Ceaseless can do is slam his hand down in a wave of red-hot parched air that knocks you to your feet and instantly kills you if you're lacking in defense and health. At the end of the day, he's little more than a glorified lover, though. You can consider this doubly a ranking for the Stray Demons, since they're functionally identical to one another. From Software should be given an award for reusing the template of an all-in-all pretty good fight, and somehow making every new addition a strict downgrade. The explosions that this boss creates are downright ludicrous, especially considering the speed at which the demon can recover from using one of the variants. I would reckon the two-handed hammer slam explosion is a bit more reasonable, extending only a bit behind the Firesage as well to cover its backside, but the one it creates by throwing its arm out wide is actually criminal! When he isn't pile-driving my asshole with asinine red magic, he at least has a few standard normal people attacks that still involve using his staff like a hammer. The frequency he casts the explosions and disgustingly low recovery time you get after each one is just frankly unforgivable, dropping this boss to the bottom of C tier. The few shining golden rays of light from the Asylum Demon template underneath it all keep it barely dangling above the bottom rung. I just have so little to say about the entirety of the Demon Ruins cadre, and even less so about this backstep of a reskin. This isn't even the first time I've had to complain about a supposed evolution of the first boss of a game that in truth chokes on its own shit, and I'm gonna have to do it again if I make a Dark Souls 2 video. This boss is only above the next one out of obligation. In honesty, they should both be 25. The Centipede Demon is a big creature that comes down from the wall to attack you and bears the orange charred ring necessary to walk across lava and trek into Lost Isolith. It's got some decent lore beyond that, as the manifestation of the ring itself, once worn by big ol' Ceaseless Discharge to soothe his infinite pain before being dropped into the lava below. Unfortunately, that little lore tidbit is the most positive thing I can say about this encounter. The Centipede Demon hangs around in a gigantic field of lava and rock platforms, the vast majority of which are innately inaccessible, since unlike Elden Ring's dollar store shit, Dark Souls lava denatures you like a fucking protein. You can theoretically go run that way across our long rocky path to a bigger island than this one right by the door, but you couldn't give me the world if it meant I had to give the slightest damn about the Centipede Demon boss fight. This guy stands out of reach for the first minute and a half of every attempt, hucking his crawly hands at you to retreat before you can even counterattack. And when he does finally close in, every move makes me want to pull out my teeth. He can leap into the air for a tail slam or to throw a magma bomb down, grab you with an animation that doesn't suggest it's even going to be a grab attack, and just all around be a very unfun guy. You can cut his tail off to get the orange charred ring prematurely though, and turn the whole arena into your extremely hot oyster. So if you're lucky and he stops moving for even a microsecond to allow you to cut its tail off, then maybe you can find even the smallest iota of a fun time. I so badly want to be the Bed of Chaos advocate. I so badly want to say that I can like this fight. It's got a good concept on paper, but executes it so unfortunately. They do it in the absolute worst way possible. For a while I had the route memorized. I knew where the floor broke out and when to run between the various different attack cycles. But prior to my most recent run, I forgot. It had been a while since I last played Dark Souls 1 before this video, which means I had to go through the new player experience of trial and error to weed out the safe opportunities all over again, which meant falling into an instant kill hole about 8 times. If you aren't keen on the progression of the battle and have intuited the route to victory, you're going to spend more time running to this boss than actually inside of its arena. And that's really unfortunate, because I kind of like the song, and you scarcely get to hear it for longer than 30 seconds no matter the outcome. Obviously the bulk of the grief stems from getting to the second orb. I've tried leaving both directions for second, and have come to the conclusion that I prefer the left path for the crumbling floor. The Bed of Chaos is a sequence of timers all going off out of sync. Everything has a cooldown and will occur as soon as it can. I understand the mechanisms behind it, the way the arms behave based on if one or both sweeps, the ways and locations the sights step downward and all that. You gotta wait for all those cycles to sync while hoping you have the necessary health and defense to endure for that long, while hoping you don't get effortlessly brushed into a pit by broom hands. Unless you rush through the whole thing in one life, something I used to be able to do with the save and quit to go back to the entrance after destroying each orb. The fact you're walking to the arena more than inside of it is just such an ultimate deal breaker. If the falls were in any way less punishing, the fight could be a lot higher, but if the falls were in any way less punishing, then it wouldn't be the fucking Bed of Chaos. The Sanctuary Guardian is a bit of a contentious boss for me because I can recognize that the groundwork is far above the kinds of main game slop they were making by comparison just a year prior. But in practice, he is just a really obnoxious fucker. This illustrious manticore acts as the protector of the Ulasil Sanctuary and the first boss of the DLC. He has a wide variety of attacks that can express control over the battle at any range, using lightning orbs that spread through the water from a distance, and applying immense pressure with bites and headlong charges while in melee range. The primary issue I hold with the Sanctuary Guardian is that the fight just does not flow well or feel responsive if you are any less than light rolling. I figured out the proper way to dodge his completely hapticless 4-step head motion combo, and I still think it's an absolutely awful attack. I am a fan of the wing air blast that sets the player up for the charge move, since it's rewarding to dodge by offering a sizable punish window though. The way that the Sanctuary Guardian soars through the air can feel a bit clunky at times, and this fight is a sort of mix of lock-on and lock-off gameplay. An issue the Guardian begins that applies to every boss in the DLC is that elemental damage types are rendered far too universally ineffective. I was still able to do damage just fine with optimized pyromancy on SL1 and partial magic damage on the other character, but as time will show, I had to bring some guest star characters to take down a few of the other DLC bosses, because lightning and magic damage just weren't cutting it at all. The Sanctuary Guardian lands where it does because as a DLC fight, it is structurally a whole rung above vast swaths of the base game content, but the execution can feel a bit excessive and clunky to an at times irritating degree. Personal biases on that kind of thing causes it to fall where it does. I find the people who gush about this guy to be quite annoying, but I would be remiss not to put him at his proper place as a top 3 boss, and restate the obvious point that he went on to define a decade of successors. Whether it be in From Software's own titles or those that seek to replicate the style and genre, there is always Artorias. Artorias is probably the only boss in this game that I would say has enough unique moves for me to not really want to get into the nitty-gritty of them all. He's got a leaping slam that can cover the whole of the arena, that double twirl spin thing that Sif does, which I guess makes sense, and a whole lot more. The main noteworthy things I want to mention are his two different slashes, though. He's got one with a delay and one that is more instant, usually favoring the former from a further distance, which really catches me off guard a lot of the time for some reason. He also, of course, periodically backs away to begin collecting dark energy into himself, giving him a huge boost to his damage if he's allowed to complete the animation. It can be interrupted with enough stagger damage to his face, and I'm pretty sure that if he does another before the first wears off, they do actually stack into instant kill potential. The battle with Artorias does not need me to frame what makes it so prestigious, because it will do that for you by itself. The fact that he also rolls to reposition makes the battle feel extremely equal, even though unlike you, he is literally one of God's champions. His attacks flow seamlessly, and each of them is comparatively defined and bold when weighed against the kind of things seen in the base game. The animations themselves convey plenty of character. I had a grin the whole time I was fighting him, even with each death on my first playthrough. I had of course played Elden Ring prior to this game, it was what got me into the genre and all that, and this was the first boss that finally felt equivalent to what I have seen of FromSoft's modern potential. I wish here, more importantly, his equipment was used a bit less as a buzzword in the later titles, but what can you do? The whole point was kind of that he failed and his entire legacy was a hollow cover-up, guys. There was nothing majestic about him. Kalameet wins the award for most absolutely frustrating boss to go out of your way to fight. It's naturally a combination of the prerequisite steps for setting up the battle, and likewise the runback that irritates me way more than it ought to. Being forced to purposefully do the runback once for absolutely no reason other than to die so that Goth will help you by shooting him is kind of a short-sighted decision in my opinion. Kalameet has a great host of identifiable attacks that, due to the way they often chain into one another, gives the battle a healthy dose of consistency. His forward lunge will always lead into a sweeping flame breath attack, while his mid-air dive will always lead into a tail swiper slam. Where Kalameet begins to absolutely fall apart, in my opinion, is in the hitboxes. There is nothing enjoyable about his stationary tantrum move, and even God fucking shivers when he does that horseshit head sweep lunge move. They don't function well as deterrents or as proactive attacks, and only serve to make me extremely upset. There are some things that Kalameet does great though, whereas bosses like Phase 2 Ornstein and the Four Kings create rather nonsensically punishing radial explosions, unforgivingly punishing taking preliminary actions. Kalameet's must respond quickly, get away from me attack gradually expands outward over time, meaning if you are slow, you still have a fairer opportunity to escape. His tail cut may also seem obtuse at first, but it's not really all that hard to set up a way to consistently make it vulnerable by baiting the tail slam after he does the dive bomb, which makes for a nice way to get the Obsidian Greatsword easily. I'm actually going to make this section a sandwich and now double back to things that annoy me again, because I'm frustrated that I don't actually like this boss at all, but I'm forced to recognize that it can't possibly be worse than the Four Kings or Nito. I think his standing fire breath attack and the Calamity debuffing Tinnitus Scream share a slightly too similar telegraph, and the fact that he is not weak to lightning is stupid. The lore dramatically emphasizes the critical flaw of the ancient dragons is their susceptibility to lightning, and now here comes Kalameet with a rather hefty resistance to it. Fuck off, Dark Souls 1 DLC, and your tendency to invalidate split damage builds to a far greater degree than the rest of the game. Anyone who thinks Manus is poorly designed simply doesn't understand how to fight him. That is my, single uncompromising elitist take of the video. This gargantuan antler monkey wizard is doubtlessly the best of the game's bosses, in my opinion of course. His attack variety is through the roof, and yet entirely determined by the status of the battle. He may have a lot of unique moves to worry about, but you can count on what he is and isn't going to do based on the distance you are away from him. Manus can apply pressure from anywhere in the arena with even just his hands in the first phase, let alone when he starts casting swaths of sable death magic in his second. Pretend at all times that Manus has a circle around him of about 5 feet, and think of it as a strict danger zone. You may enter it and not be punished, but you will forever be at risk of overextending your pro-action. This fight is best handled reactively from mid-range. Respond to his attacks rather than be the aggressive party, because all of the ones that end with him using his elastic spiral arm leave his hand pressed against the ground exposed for a second or more. That is your time to return damage. There. You will, with a healthy dose of patience, never need to fear the retaliation of the infamous combo or get your head caved in by his jump smash. If you are not in close range when he's selecting his next move, you will never see them. And you never need to be in close range if you just counter his hand moves. If he does the two-fisted lunge slam, there's also a free opportunity to counter there, but always retreat before he gets the opportunity to make his next move. Staying too far can be just as dangerous though, especially in the second phase. He can super extend his arm into a screen-clearing swipe or an extremely long-distance slam you should roll to the side for. Not the most dangerous moves on their own, but if he uses the Ring of Enclosing Dark Magic in the second phase, you're fucked if you try to stay too far out consistently. Mid-range allows you to bait and punish his attacks that by design have the greatest end lag. Mid-range prevents being threatened by his sticky hand slaps and melee range stunlock combo. Mid-range allows you to dive to the side of the Dark Beat attack while it's still thin, run inward in time for the enclosing ring, or run whatever way you please for the Dark Rain. And it doesn't feel boring to fight in this way because there is always something happening. You're not waiting for any particular move because the fight is clearly built around this playstyle, and you always have something to react to. If you can dissect Manus' behavior and come to this conclusion in spite of the obscurity of his Dark Arena and large chaotic action pool, you'll have a much easier time with this most ultimate of bosses. His design is my favorite in the game too. I'm such a sucker for horns and monstrous postures. His song has that iconic repeated downward trending tense sequence, which really adds to the atmosphere. The arena is littered with obstacles and other features that make it interesting looking without being too obstructive. Without a doubt my favorite boss in the game, and would probably be pretty high up there for the series as a whole if I had to consider it. Gwyn is a very polarized fight, and that's not remotely a new take. He's a boss that allows you to decide how much trouble he's going to give you, and I can't really imagine that was by design. He is, of course, the final boss of the game, fought in the Kiln of the First Flame, the old fuel in need of replacing by yourself. The game constantly calls attention to his responsibility for the events of the story, reminding you that with no question, he will be your final obstacle. If you aren't aware that he's such a parryable bitch like I was in my first playthrough, this old man may look like he's lost his luster, but he remains without a doubt the most aggressive and tireless boss in the whole of the base game. You're given 20 Estus free of charge for this battle, and more than half of them will be healing taxed by an unbidden sword thrust to the jugular if you fight him normally. His attack pool is rather sizable, featuring a long-distance jump slash that feels insanely cool to parry, a few slash combos of varying speeds, a thrust attack that seems like it ignores iframes just because it wants to, and an explosive but very easy to bait and dodge grab move. I wanted to incorporate a healthy mix of standard combat and parrying into the footage you're seeing to give a sense of both ways a player could approach this battle. And parries can still mean a free window to heal, even if you don't want to cheese them that way. Fuck, they might even be necessary at times. I know he's obviously meant to be well past his glory days, and they didn't give him any of his extremely lore-important lightning magic for that reason, but even some kind of meek lightning spear type ranged attack could make Gwyn feel just a bit less one-note as an over-aggressive melee asshole. Dark Souls 3 kind of did that, I guess, but the circumstances in that case were fairly different. I can't really put Gwyn too low, because even if I find his raw relentlessness to be somewhat to his detriment, it is without a doubt tense, and one of the more entertaining displays of swordplay in the base game. I can't kick him down the list for just being a victim of how busted shields are in Dark Souls 1 in general. If I wasn't going to change the Capra Demon's ranking because a particular item makes the fight much easier, I'm not going to change Gwyn's ranking because a particular item makes the fight much easier. His boss theme transcends the game in terms of recognition, and it definitely sets a good tone for the battle and where the ending leaves you. But holy shit, don't read the comments on any YouTube upload of this fucking song. Your stomach will cave in from just how annoyingly people wax poetic about it. So yeah, that was my thoughts on every boss in Dark Souls 1. I initially didn't plan to do this video because it's so clear-cut how absolutely mid a lot of the game's bosses truly are, with the DLC standing so much above the rest. But then I realized how much I disagreed with so many other people and sources on some battles that I have rather choice opinions about. I made a community post clarifying that the Sultan Sanctuary Ascended mod video I promised at the end of the Lies of P boss ranking was cancelled because the mod just isn't worth talking about. This video also pretty clearly hints I want to hit the other games in the series over the head with this format, so expect that maybe. I'm feeling a bit scattered in terms of content I want to make right now, so definitely shoot me some recommendations if you have any. I would also like to give another thanks for the performance and reception to the previous video. I got a fair few subscribers and such from it to the point where YouTube felt the need to stop individually notifying me about every new person. I appreciate the constant support, and it really keeps me going. Alright, thanks for watching.